What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another draft breakdown for the Detroit Lions. We have two players left to take a look at. One is a nose tackle, the other one's a quarterback. And today, we're talking defense. We're going to Brodric Martin out of Western Kentucky. So let's get it started. Welcome everybody to the video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, I'm excited about this one. We're about finished with the series. Only the two players left. And I'm saving Hendon Hooker for last because I just kind of assume that video is going to take the longest. Who knows? It'll probably be the shortest video. Just because I assume it's going to be long, it'll probably be super short. But I'm saving that one for last. Today, however, we're going back to the defensive side of the ball with the guy that I would say was probably a little bit of a surprise pick just based on the chat's reaction when we took the player. I think first off, he wasn't a very popular prospect in terms of he didn't get a lot of attention. He was a non-combine invite, as Brad Holmes touched on after the draft. Not a lot of people were talking day two for this guy either. Now, I know I was super excited when we took him because I had really just watched the player. I had just took a look at who this guy was, had some notes on him, and if you guys go back and watch my reaction, I'm flipping through my notebook. I'm like, I know I saw this guy, okay? I know I just did stuff on him, and I finally found it, so I was pumped when we made this draft pick. His name was fresh in my mind, a guy that I did like. Now, maybe it wasn't necessarily the build that I was anticipating the Lions would go for defensive tackle, even though now I think we have a much better understanding and perspective of why they did what they did, and I think I have a really good comp to give you guys in this video. But that's right, we're going to the nose tackle, man, and I'm excited about this one. This was a player that played a ton in college, transferred to Western Kentucky for these past 2 seasons, had his best pass rushing year this past season when you look at some of the advanced statistics, played and flashed against some big schools, Indiana, Auburn, popped in the East-West Shrine Bowl. As Brad Holmes put it, that was the game that he really was like, oh, who is this guy? So I'm pumped about this one. Let's waste no time. Who is Brodric Martin? Well, let's start there. Quick little background. So as you guys can see, spent time at Western Kentucky these past 2 seasons, and before that he was from North Alabama. So these past 2 years played and started all 14 games for Western Kentucky. Redshirt junior, redshirt senior. You can see the numbers on the screen. A 5-year senior, so he's an older prospect. He's 24 years old, listed in at about 6'4.5", 330 pounds. So he's a big man. Like he's definitely a nose tackle. You won't question that, wearing the number 99 in the clips that you will see today. And then you look at some of the statistics. Now, again, usually these are a little more of the advanced statistics. These are according to PFF. 10.1% pass rush win rate, 8.2% run stop win rate, 19 hurries. That one popped a little bit. 19 hurries, which was tied for 37th in the country. You can see where his snaps came in. Majority of them came between the A gap and B gap because he's a nose tackle. Now, occasionally you would get him pushed out, maybe at a 5. Example against UTSA, he had a couple of reps there on the offensive tackle. I wouldn't say they went the best. There was one good one, though. But he moved around a tad, but aside of that, he really stayed between the A and the B gap. Also had some zero technique in there. Like, he mixed around different techniques. Zero, a lot of shade, some 3 technique. But for the most part, the guy is a nose tackle. And then you can see at the bottom some of those athletic testing scores that he posted. Now, as Brad Holmes touched on, after the selection, he felt like the guy looked better on tape than maybe what the numbers said. We've looked at the RAS score all the time now. It's just like a thing. You draft somebody and people start immediately looking up, what's his relative athletic score? How did he test in? That's very popular now. Makes tons of sense. Nose tackles usually aren't going to test it extremely well here, but usually if they do, they get drafted much higher because it's like, hold up, that guy's super athletic and he's a nose tackle. Like, that's kind of rare. So usually you don't get that with nose tackles, which is why a lot of times you'll see them fall. They're space eaters. John Pennicini, you think of Damon Harrison. I mean, there's a lot of guys. You can go down a list of players that fall into that category. But I do tend to agree with Brad here. 20 bench press reps I don't think was like way off. Okay, I know there's a lot of people talking about his strength at the point of attack. Wasn't necessarily something that I thought flashed big time to me like some other people have said. So the 20 bench press reps makes sense. Also, he has 35-inch arms, which is probably the biggest thing that you should take away is that a guy has 35-inch arms. So he's a little bit on the taller side for a lot of nose tackles. A lot of times you get the squat. He's 6'2". Maybe the Lee McNeil, the kind of vision of those players, and those guys are a lot of times kind of your, run stuffers. They're your pluggers in the interior. We just got Lee McNeil is a good athlete, so he's like a little bit of a bonus. But in this case with Brodric Martin, while he didn't test out extremely well, he is a much longer, somewhat taller than a lot of nose tackles that you see. So he had the 20 bench press reps, the 5.36 40-yard time, 1.8 10-yard split, which is actually pretty good, and the 25-inch vertical, which, is nothing outstanding there. You kind of want to put these in perspective as usual, and I think I have a good comparison. So we did a video, I know with Rad, we did kind of the podcast episode, and we talked about the defense and what it could look like, and I comped the Lions to the Saints in the past and the way they built their defense. We were really trying to figure out the linebacker position, all of those things. How do these guys fit in? But man, I think I am may have found actually a much better comparison here than the Saints. Not to say that one was necessarily bad, but I think I found a really good one here, and that is with a team of the Cincinnati Bengals. That's right. So I'm going to comp this a little bit to the Bengals, and I'm going to give you a player to comp him to, athletically speaking, in a sense, okay? But I'm going to compare him to the Cincinnati Bengals and this Lions defense. So you can see I threw some of the names up here on the screen. So if there's some connections, obviously Trey Hendrickson was with the Saints, drafted by the Saints, round 3 pick. Now he's with the Cincinnati Bengals, so there's that. And then you also keep in mind that the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals was the defensive coordinator, the interim defensive coordinator for Dan Campbell. So back when he was with the Miami Dolphins, took over as the interim head coach, this was the defensive coordinator who is now the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. There's some connections here. You can see based on the way that a lot of these guys are built, how there's similarities in terms of just kind of the prototypes, the body types that you're adding to your defensive line. And I think it does go beyond the defensive line, even to the linebacker position, trying to look at the front seven and see how maybe it could look for the Lions. I think that you can really look at Cincinnati and possibly get some idea of how this Lions defense could look. I mean, I brought up the 6-1 fronts that were displayed by that Saints team with Alex Anzalone and some of the versatility that they had, and I anticipate we're going to have the body types to do that. Not against everybody, but for example, like Cincinnati, they ran some 6-1 looks, 6 guys on the ball, 1 off-ball linebacker. They did things like that. However, I think you can even compare it somewhat to the second level, and I won't spend a ton of time here, but we know that they have Wilson as one of their linebackers, a guy that's 6'2", 240, ran a 4.63. He was really well known for his run defense coming out of Wyoming, had a Mike slash Sam linebacker type of build. I think you could kind of comp that to us adding a Jack Campbell. Now, Jack Campbell's kind of a unicorn in the sense that, you know, he's a little bit on the taller side, being at like 6'4.5", and as big as he is, pushing 250 pounds with the way that he runs. But again, this is another really good run defender, so I kind of feel like you can maybe somewhat comp those similarities. And then their other off-ball linebacker, because they don't roll with a ton of off-ball linebackers, which again, I think will be similar to us as we've seen. You know, they have Jermaine Pratt from this past season, and Jermaine Pratt was the guy that was a defensive back transition to linebacker, known a little bit more for his coverage, but still wasn't some big-time undersized linebacker, 6'2", 240, 5'7", 40-yard dash, and I think you could possibly comp him to a guy in terms of, again, build to an Alex Anzalone, a guy that, again, is more known as a coverage linebacker. I think that's the best aspect of his game. That's not completely undersized. He was a versatile type of piece, though I don't think he's the best at taking on blocks, so I think it even goes beyond just looking at defensive line, and that's a really good way to give a comparison. So, of course, I had to look at DJ Reader. Now, one thing that's important as we're comparing it to the Cincinnati defense, you go back a couple of those podcast episodes when I said, hey, what's one thing I think this Lions defense must improve upon? I said stopping running quarterbacks, stopping opposing quarterbacks from having success rushing the football. And the numbers are pretty terrible there when we kind of went through them. You look at it statistically, the Lions allowed 7 yards per carry last season to quarterbacks, 7 touchdowns. Best in the league, allowing 41 yards per game, 2 quarterbacks rushing, second most attempts against them, 100 for 700 yards. Terrible against running quarterbacks. In general, they weren't great against the run, but they did pick it up, especially against running backs towards the second half of the season. 5.2 yards per carry, that was tied for 31st. 146 yards a game, that was 29th in the league. But you look at a team like the Bengals, and I'm not saying that it's, well, we're going to do immediately that, but the Bengals are a good team to try to comp to because they have one of the best run defenses in the league, right? Tied for 7th in terms of yards per carry, 7th in terms of yards per game. And then also against opposing rushing quarterbacks, they are one of the best in the league. And we know this is the team that has to deal with a team like the Baltimore Ravens. Games, they allowed 4.8 yards per carry, 12 for 58. I wouldn't say that's necessarily terrible considering who that quarterback is on the other side. But on a season, they only allowed 4.3 yards per carry to quarterbacks versus our 7, only 3 touchdowns versus our 7, and only 282 yards versus our 700. So it's not the worst team to comp to, and the reason I quickly bring that up is because, again, as I talked about in that defensive video, which I think brings a lot of carryover here, is how important schematically can play into that. Less bodies, right? Having guys that you feel can potentially plug more than one gap necessarily. And I think when you look at the Lions personnel, you look at some of the body types for between the Josh Pascals, the athletic, strong side defensive end, the leverage guy, the guy that can have the range to play through multiple gaps, and a Sam Hubbard, a really good athlete coming out of Ohio State. You look at a DJ Reader, who was a 4-year, $50+ million signing back in 2020, and what he's meant for that defense, because you have to have those nose tackles in that scheme. They also have the backup nose tackle as well, Tupu, I don't know how to say the dude's name, okay? But he's another kind of like space eater. However, you have to have that piece. So Lions added that piece this offseason, Brodric Martin, who, if you just look at it, let's take a look at what Brodric Martin, again, one more time, athletically, the way that he tested out. I'll read off how DJ Reader tested coming out of college. It listed at 6'2.5", 327, so a little bit on the shorter side, as you usually see. More bench press reps, 30 bench press reps. Part of that is also he has 2 inch shorter arms. But you look at some of the test scores, he ran a 5'3", 340, very similar there. 183 10-yard split, very similar there. 29.5-inch vertical, not too far off there, okay? And of course, you can compare him to other nose tackles as well. You can even compare him to a guy like Snacks Harrison, who is mainly just another guy that's a little bit, again, on the shorter side. But I think it's a really good comp to the Bengals when you just look at body types across the board. They've added their, pass rushers, the Trey Hendricksons to our Hutchinsons. They added the Gunters in the draft in 2021, the pass rusher to our Romeos and Charles, not necessarily known for the run defense. But then they also have their Zach Carters out of Florida, a big D end, right, and our John Kaminsky. So I think it's a worthy comp. And then even to that, B.J. Hill, who started 15 games this past season for them. He's a bigger defensive tackle, 6'3", 311, and I think McNeil's very athletic, but he came out at 320. Now, it looks like he's potentially shed a little bit of weight there, got a little bit leaner to kind of fit into that role as a more so pass rusher, but again, that's a big defensive tackle playing that role in the Cincinnati defense. So, again, a defense that can play potentially more than one gap up front, can clean up the second level a little bit as well, maybe allow you to put less bodies in the box, help a little bit towards those rushing quarterbacks. I think it's a worthy comparison, and that's why I bring that up. So, I didn't want to spend too much time there. You kind of have a sense of how I think this could work for the Lions, because, again, I think he's going to be a really nice piece that can rotate with Isaiah Buggs, the Benito Jones, depending on who makes the team for that position. I don't necessarily know if he'll come in as a starter. I don't really expect him to come in as a starter, I should say, as our nose tackle. But one thing that Brad Holmes did say this past offseason is they really like Isaiah Buggs, but they would like to give him less snaps. Let him be basically more of a rotational piece. We don't want to have too many snaps on this player. And honestly, you could probably say the thing about Brodric Martin, who played 534 snaps this past season. You want your nose a lot of times to be able to have those rotational pieces because, man, you're asking them to move, and those are big bodies. You can get winded fast, especially when you're playing with high energy and effort, like Isaiah Buggs does, like Benito Jones does. He plays like he just got shot up a cannon, and like Brodric Martin does. And you see that immediately if you look at the East-West Shrine Bowl. But honestly, if you watch any game of Brodric Martin, you won't really find examples of him just, he's dogging it. He's just walking, chasing the play. Like, it's incredible to see the effort and pursuit that this guy gives. And I know Brad touched on it, but you can see it immediately. And it's just every game, you just get to the point where you're not even looking for it. You just expect he's going to find his way into the play, chasing it down with effort. But anyways, that's besides the point. Let's dive into what I saw from this player with through every game this past season on Brodric Martin. And I'm going to tell you what I think about this guy. And I think a lot of my grades are somewhat similar in a more depth look this time around. Inconsistencies flash, I think, is what leads to some of the, not necessarily higher grades, because there's some that looks really good and there's some that's like, that looks messed up. But again, being an older prospect, I do think that's helpful in terms of some of the football intelligence as a pass rusher. You see that, you've seen the growth as a pass rusher. So I think that's there. You see some of the confidence I think that he plays with, the trust in his eyes. Start off with the run defensive side first here for Brodric Martin, then I'll get into some of the pass rush, and I'll kind of touch on how I felt that he performed based on certain assignments, one gap, two gap. Also touch on some of the traits as well. You're going to see this in some of those two gapping looks, sometimes the gap and a half, but the anchor at the point of attack, the ability to sit himself down, set a strong anchor, be sturdy at the point of attack, all of those things, double teams, down blocks, and we'll kind of roll through this as we touch on other, specific assignments that he has, more so with like the two gapping and things like that. But just some of my overall notes with the anchor, the point of attack, play strength as well. We'll start there first. What I do like is that his weight doesn't consistently fall over his toes on contact. He helps him maintain some body control and some balance. You'll even see that when one gapping as well. Now, one issue is, and I think this pops up for some of the inconsistencies within his game, you see it spread across a lot of different games, is this positioning into first contact. For example, he can get behind on the first step. You saw that against Austin P. Or he gets caught reaching over his base. That will happen as well. If an offensive lineman, however the offensive lineman is moving at the line of scrimmage, sometimes he doesn't necessarily get his feet into position really well, and you'll catch him kind of leaning over himself as the offensive moves away for that first punch, not necessarily matching the base with the punch, and then you cause some issues, especially when down blocks come into it or teams try to double team him at the point of attack, and his positioning is just messed up at the first point of attack. So you get flashes of both sides there. That leaves him susceptible. You saw it against UTSA, you saw it against FAU. It leaves him susceptible to getting chopped down, losing balance, for example, even though for the most part, as I touched on, I think he does a nice job holding his weight on the snap. You'll see it on zone runs as well. I think there is some flexibility, specifically in the lower body, the ability to reset his hands, flashing that recovery ability. You saw that against FAU when he keeps a wide base here against UTSA. I think he also demonstrates the knee bend and flexibility against down blocks and double teams. That's going to be extremely necessary. The ability to sink his weight down. Now, understand he's a taller nose tackle, so immediately your thoughts can be, man, he's going to be playing high all the time. And I understand there's a lot of talk about his leverage. For me, I think a lot of the leverage issues come from more so the initial positioning than really anything. And also some of that can come with wear a little bit as well as you start to get a little bit tired. But I think it's more so just the initial positioning based on what he's asked to do is where you get some questions with his leverage. But I thought he showed true knee bend, flexibility in the lower body to sit down. You saw it against Indiana there when he's trying to get in to tip the pass over the middle. That's where a lot of it stems from. Some of the issues is some of the immediate positioning. Like sometimes you get some really good, the way that he sets his base into contact and it just looks clean, while other times it's like that was not so good and it kind of throws off everything beyond it, and then you don't always see the resetting and positioning himself better, for a second effort, and sometimes he's unable to do that. Occasionally you'll get the examples where he'll get late leverage on the play. When that's the case, again, he's a tall defensive or nose tackle, so he needs to get his upper body down into contact, like against Indiana, for example. Gets in late, the leverage gets thrown off a little bit. Now, what I do like, and there's a lot of things to like, I think, about his hand usage, his hands stay ready for contact. This is a big part, especially on down blocks when he's kind of playing the gap more so, and he is, transitioning from, okay, I was going to hit the center, they're doing a zone block, maybe it's towards me, and I'm more so on the front side of it, to transition, position himself, and then have ready hands. Sometimes to me the base doesn't always get set well, but what I do think consistently does is the hand usage, because they stay ready for contact. It's a huge part of his game. Ready, fast hands. We'll talk about that a little bit more with another trait in a second. Now, where I don't think he's extremely effective in terms of that anchor is more so those short yardage, quarterback sneak situations. He doesn't have a lot of power when he gets that low, right? He can create sufficient leverage to really match up with a lot of different types of centers. I mean, he had a lot of good centers that he played last year. Jake Andrews from Troy, who was a guy that was drafted in the 4th round. That's a strong guy with a wide frame. You saw it against Auburn. Sometimes it was Trey Simpson. Other times it was Brandon Council there, who's a big guard to center, 6'4", 330. But Shrine Bowl, basically a 6'4" center there out of Minnesota Duluth, that I think can create sufficient leverage based on really any matchup that he gets. It's more so the positioning into the leverage, which can be hit and miss. But specifically on sneak situations, I didn't really find much success at all, because even if he got under the block, there was really no power, so he was just kind of going down, collapsing down. But if he did get under the block, there just wasn't a lot of power created through that leverage. So I thought, the sneak defense was kind of a disappointment. That's probably not where he's going to be super impactful, at least immediately. Now on to some of the one-gapping situations. And yeah, they definitely did this. I thought definitely towards the middle part of the season, there were some aggressive games. Middle Tennessee State comes to mind immediately because they were very aggressive into that game. I thought you saw some of that in the East-West Shrine Bowl as well. Just getting upfield occasionally, like asking to attack upfield, however that may be. But some of those one-gap assignments, what do you see? Well, again, I think he uses his hands well working through gaps. So when he's jumping, shooting upfield, I love the way that he utilizes hands. I think a lot of this, again, to me, comes back to the experience. A guy that's this experienced, that's played this much, that's played in college level for 5 seasons now. I think this is a huge part of it. And the hand usage, specifically when he's asked to shoot through gaps, is big time. The ability to keep himself clean as he's trying to split through gaps. You see it here against FAU. Look at the backhand of the swim move. Kind of create himself a lane to step through. You get the first step here against UTSA upfield. Or again against FAU, where he jumps through the gap with a swim move. He becomes a disruptor. Now, I saw a lot of one-gapping assignments on 3rd down. Maybe it was a 3rd and 5, and they would say, hey, let's go get aggressive. Maybe we'll pin our ears back a little bit more. And there was flashes of him turning into a disruptor. I thought down and distance intelligence was a big part as well. Now, this is a guy, we're going to talk about the first step in a second. when you talk about getting off the line of scrimmage, he absolutely tries to time the snap. Like, this is a player that tries to get a sense of when the snap is coming. You'll see it. You can slow it down. There's an example here against Indiana where you can see him actually move before anyone else does based on the snap count, and that is a big advantage for him, but it can also at times be a disadvantage, as we'll touch on. However, what you do see is a player that I think has that really good down and distance intelligence, knows when he can get a little bit more aggressive, fast eyes, and he plays with confidence. And I thought that was something that stood out to me. Fast eyes with confidence into his assignments against Auburn. Like, that's what flashed. There was some good, there was some ugly, but you were like, oh, this guy can hang. Like, he's confident himself and he's playing fast, and that was huge. He didn't look like a guy that was just like, man, he's kind of just like trying to catch up to everything. Like, he played at a really good speed, I thought, against Auburn, which popped to me. You even see it here against Rice. It's examples like that. The guy can be a disruptor. Now, I think he has sufficient, not good, not great. I think he's sufficient in terms of his lateral first step movement skills. Would ask to do a lot of slant attacks, which is not necessarily something that we're, not used to. Our defense did a lot of this when we kind of transition. Maybe we bring our slot corner down and we'd ask, gaps to move one over. You'd have to go from C to B to B to A, and you would have to do that on one side of the line of scrimmage. So for him, he was asked to do that. Not all the time, but sometimes they would ask him to do it in like a gap and a half responsibility, where he'd go from, maybe a one tech or a 2-eye jumping to the B gap, so jumping more outside of the guard and then positioning himself to squeeze that gap, right? They did a lot of little things like that, so you got to see that opportunity. I thought it was sufficient lateral first step. His process can get a little bit long when shooting gaps upfield. That would be the big, I wouldn't even say it's a big knock, but it didn't flash as often as I thought. Like, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this could be a problem, where you kind of have like oh man, he's lifting his arms up, he's setting up, and then he's going like there's too much here, it's not immediate. However, that was only like really one example I could point to where I thought it didn't look good. Now, he does pop up a little bit at times before launching, and I don't think some of that transition between launching off the line to creating acceleration and closing, speed is very seamless. You kind of get, I think, more so one than the other, which is usually the first step. Kind of launching is really nice, but you don't get necessarily some of that close to be able to gain an edge and finish. Like, that's a problem, and it's probably not why he's the best for a consistent one-gapping upfield approach, because he can get that first step. Sometimes he can split gaps, he can clear himself, but he doesn't always have, or he really doesn't have that closing acceleration or closing burst to consistently make plays in the backfield. I thought you saw in the Shrine Bowl the way that he shot back there, got his hand on running back down, he was fired up, but that's not him. That's not something that I think you want to consistently ask of him. He fits into more of that idea of attack and react for sure. However, I do think he has plus body control when shooting gaps, and you'll see it. Like, football intelligence, there's a knack, there's a feel for it. The guy, when you talk about the player has a feel, he has a feel for shooting gaps, subtle movements, the way he attacks lanes. Now, I didn't think necessarily he was extremely slippery, or necessarily he could get really skinny, specifically in the lower body. If you hit him, under the waist, he's probably going to just tumble down. Although, again, he had the ability to kind of twist, open up his upper body, find his way through gaps, and just do enough, really, to just get into a gap. As I touched on, he can get kind of chopped down below the waist. But even an example like this against Auburn, working on the guard here, it does take an athlete to quickly get back on his feet and get back into this play. That's effort, that's desire, but that's an athletic recovery, because his feet doesn't necessarily get completely off the ground. His feet don't really get off the ground that much, and he's not flying through there. I think that speaks to some of the vertical, the 25 inches. He's not super explosive as much as I think he could be a little bit more crafty as a run defender, and specifically as a pass rusher. Now, when you see some of the gap and half work, we won't spend a lot of time here. Again, they didn't do this a ton. As I touched on, he did a lot of that pro snap movement. So again, if I'm a line, maybe even in a one tech, and he's asking to jump to a 3 at the snap, like, hey, get outside the guard. Of course, for the offensive line, that can throw them off a little bit, right? Because they would maybe have him jump to a different gap, and then a linebacker who would be aligning in the B gap pre-snap would then dive into the A gap. So you have a lot going on there, and the offensive lineman may like jump inside, be like, oh, I got to get back outside, and all of a sudden he's shooting my gap. So they created disruption that way. Now, I do think that for him, his feet can get a tad slow. He was kind of asked play through the B gap into the A gap. That sidestep can get a tad high. Again, I think you see another example here against Rice. It's not terrible, but what it leads to is that punch in his hand gets a little bit high, and it makes the shed a little bit less concise. So you have him come out a little bit wider on this play to recover. And again, he's not super like twitchy in terms of change of direction. So for him, you don't get a guy that like if he's moving this way, he's going to punch and then he's like super shifty laterally to kind of go bop, bop, bop and just kind of bounce around. That's not really him. So again, the first immediate move is extremely crucial with him. And there's some really good and there's some ugly. I think if you work on the consistency there, you'll get a much more consistent player. Ready hands on movement. Okay, look, first off, there's a good rep here against FAU. He's in a 2-eye and then he works to the outside the guard, plays B gap to the A gap, right? He plays through the A gap from the B gap with, again, that side step. And that's a really nice rep there. The lateral movement at the snap. And again, like I said, the ready hands on contact is a huge part. And this is it's a great example on how his hands are just there. His hands are always holstered. They stay ready. It's kind of like we touched on with Sorstal. His hands don't drop. That's huge, especially for guys taking a lot of snaps. So while, you know, sometimes the leverage can be hit and miss and the positioning, his hands are always ready. I mean, that is awesome, and I love that about his game. Now, I'm going to make a very important point about his get-off in the next couple of clips because I think it can make things go from bad to worse. But here you see a really nice job handling the down block, closing that window for the guard to hit, and then also twisting and showing some knee bend there. Here, he's a little bit later off the line. I don't think he has a great way to combat when he does get late off the line to how do I still hold an anchor. And then here, you notice the subtle resetting of hands. He's high. I would like to see more bend and sit down here, but I like how he gets that second footing quickly to set his base, and then he subtly resets his hands. I like that. Now, these are two plays I have to point out. Of course, this is the Shrine Bowl, and one thing I notice is I really like him a lot more on the ball, closer to the center, closer to the zero technique, things like that. Seems to help with his snap timing, more consistency there, because I think a lot of his leverage at the snap can really kind of lean on this. When he gets off the line really quickly, really clean with the snap, I think you see much better leverage into first contact. But seemingly, when he gets off late, meaning that the offensive lineman is already in his set, he tends to get a little bit higher. So I wondered why he was getting so high on some of these snaps in the Shrine Bowl. And to me, I think some of it was also the adjustment to, hey, he's already set. Instead of me, you know, not necessarily taking on hands well, as you'll see a little bit later in this, because he's already in position, exposing my chest, which flashes as an issue. I'm going to go straight over top with explosiveness. That way I can use my length and try to keep you from even getting your hands on me, and I can control this block early. So I thought it was kind of an adjustment, honestly, for him, even though it looked kind of like, oh, he's just popping straight up. With that being said, I think they can work on improving, you know, ways to kind of battle back if he is a little bit later off the line of scrimmage. I say resetting a lot in this video, but even that, like positioning yourself if you're in a bad position to find better ways to get your hands on, maybe that's by chopping down and then resetting your hands, then this. But I thought it was an adjustment because as you see on the next play, he's not necessarily doing that. He's not launching straight up. Good timing, and he launches with good leverage. On to some of those two-gap situations where I think, again, two-gap meaning, you know, maybe you're playing both A-gaps. A lot of times that's what a nose does, you know, because he may have the range or the length. And obviously this player has more than enough length to do that. 35 inches, again, it's kind of rare for that position. So if he can show that he's able to bend at the knees and he's able to maintain a sturdy anchor, he's going to be really good playing both A-gaps. The issue usually with a guy that's this big is that he can't consistently hold his leverage down, and he gets, you know, he'll get forklifted by centers, and that's where the problem will come into play. However, I think he definitely shows that he's capable, specifically of resetting his weight after first contact to get more force. You see that here against Indiana. Also, you'll get a lot of push-pull win potential, which we'll touch on more with the pass rush. I think there's plus torque in his shed. Okay, there's plus upper body torque through contact. And then again, fast eyes, which is something that I really like as well. Not always, but for the most part, pretty fast eyes, resetting for down blocks. That's the biggest thing. To me, it's not necessarily always recognition as much as it is just consistently resetting down for down blocks. You'll see it on some of those gap plays where maybe they pull away from him. You saw it against MTSU. He tends to do a nice job from the zero tech of really closing that distance, making himself a small target for the guard. But I think speeding up that process of being able to reset, that way he can take on that oncoming guard, especially when he gets in a little bit high, or some of the stretch zone plays will throw at him. And then other times I think he just misses the recognition of it, and he doesn't necessarily even like seem to pay attention to, hey, down block's coming. He doesn't really get prepared for it, and then he gets pushed off the ball. Sometimes you see him just get lifted up into the air. Some of them are just really bad, but it's not consistent. It's just kind of flash of like, ooh, that was pretty darn bad. See him get too much space, like against FAU, and then he's reaching, and it makes it very difficult for him to shed without great initial hands. Like I said, he doesn't really ever overset. He doesn't really overset that often. I mean, it's pretty rare to find it, and he plays pretty balanced, and he's able to really minimize the movement off the line. A little bit more of kind of the traits aspect. We talk about some of the first step off the line of scrimmage. For the way that we're going to utilize this guy, to me, it's more about getting set. It's not necessarily like, oh, how fast can he jump through a gap? Maybe you ask him to do that occasionally, like they did at Western Kentucky. But it's going to be more so about how fast can you get in your position, set yourself down, and play the block. And I thought he forced issues, like a fast edge rusher who can force a false start, a guy that's playing in a zero technique, minimizing the foot matching skills that he has to have from playing a shade, and instead he's able to just launch off the line of scrimmage, the timing of the snap, the immediate hands. That's what's going to be key, because you have to be able to play a lot of time through multiple gaps, so you have to be able to position yourself quickly. That's an area where he's much better. I know first step a lot of times just gets looked at getting upfield, but it's a little bit different in his case because of what he's going to be asked to do. Great, I say great reaction speed at the snap to first movement. As I said, he works the time of the snap. The downside is, number one, he jumps off sides. This happens. So Hawaii, I counted him doing it twice. UTSA, UAB, both were close. Even when he doesn't jump sometimes, he still gets out of position. So when the snap happens, now he's not in a really good spot again. And if his initial movement is thrown off, everything could get thrown off in his rep. So it's good and it's bad. But I do think is you do see a guy that's clearly has really good awareness. Probably a lot of film study goes into that. And just having the like, okay, I know when this is coming. Like the awareness is real. You see it in the vision. You see it in a lot of different ways. The pass rush gets his hands inside consistently from a zero technique position, accuracy, and discipline. He keeps his hands inside, he keeps his shoulders inside, and he consistently gets his hands inside. The only thing that flashes an issue again is if he's caught reaching a little bit, or if he's a little bit maybe high. And again, usually that's from kind of a misplay or a misstep on his first step. However, you get consistent inside hands. He's not usually playing with outside hands. He's usually winning that battle. And it also comes back to moving first, reacting to first movement, and also a very minimal process to getting into the chest. Those two things tie together, and he can beat you immediately. A lot, and he's beating all these dudes immediately, so that's a big part of his game as well. Below average lateral foot speed, as I touched on, this really shows up when if he's trying to recover. So if he gets caught behind of like a zone or a stretch play, you see it here against Charlotte. It's kind of the lack of lateral foot speed without necessarily just turning completely, perpendicular to the line of scrimmage, and then at that point you can get pushed out of the play. Without doing that, he does lack some lateral foot twitch, foot speed, again, because he's trying to also kind of stay low. So the way that you'll see him win on those is he leans on, okay, I'm going to beat you upfield because I'm going to get off, I'm going to get upfield, I'm going to attack in your body, and then I'm also going to get my hands inside. And he gets his hands inside, and he has enough body control because of how he carries that weight. He doesn't get caught falling over. He carries the weight well. So even though he's not the twitchiest, he's not winning that way. He has to win his way, which is carry my weight properly, flow with the play, get my hands inside, and then turn this offensive lineman back around. Ready hands, stay holstered. You see it against Austin Peay, fast eyes, and then again, you see again the flashes of adapting to take on down blocks head on. There was a really good one against Auburn. So you see those flashes in there. Now, we're about to talk about vision, but how about a play like this? I always like how he seems to have the recognition to try to keep his guys clean towards the second level, but look at the vision on the back. And then the other kind of point that I want to hit on as a run defender is that great vision, is the vision through, the backfield. Some of this is his height. Obviously, it's going to help you when you're 6'4.5", and you can see over most offensive linemen, specifically on the interior. But it's huge. Like, whether that's playing two gap, whether that's even play action, the vision is huge. He always seems to know where the football is. Always. I mean, there's examples of him playing a zero and the ball bounces out, outside towards the D gap, and you see him bounce off and then take off and chase it down. He always seems to know where the football is. I mean, there's not a lot of examples of him just kind of running around. He always knows where the football is. He has great vision in the backfield, finding the ball, playing through contact. That was a knock on Reader. Some of that, again, comes back to height. But that is not a knock on this player whatsoever. High energy, high effort, in pursuit. You'll love it. If there's one thing you want to love a high energy player, look no further than Brodric Martin. He's always found pursuing. Now, his pad level can get a little high when his assignment changes at the snap. I thought this was a big flashpoint, I think even in the Shrine Bowl, where if his assignment, okay, I'm going to take this step, I'm going to get into contact here, maybe I'm playing, gap and a half, maybe, for example. But then there's movement, so maybe there's a puller, maybe there's a stretch zone, whatever it may be, and now my assignment, maybe I shifted. Maybe I went from I'm taking on the guard to now I'm taking on the center or the tackle. That is, to me, when you'll see his pad level rise a little bit, because, again, the initial movement's here, and then he tries to adapt, and he doesn't always continuously sit down, especially as the game wears on, and he'll pop up. Now, I thought he could get caught misstepping, specifically on some of these gap plays where they'd kind of down block him and push him out of the play. But here, again, when he's able to create a really nice base, he can use the subtle hand movement to reset like he does here, and then watch him just squeeze this offensive lineman back into the gap. Here, another down block, as you can see, he kind of gets pushed into it, but look at how he resets his hands, and then again, he gets back involved with this play. And even this one, where he definitely oversets on this one, he starts to lose balance, which doesn't happen a ton, but you still have to credit some of the recovery ability here to get back and make a play and then find a way to get his hands on the chest. He needs to get his feet down because other times his feet will be in the air and he has basically no anchor to sit on there. Also, he'll lose leverage. So again, that's when he starts to lean on kind of fast hands. I'm going to get my hands on you first. Also length, which again can be negated a little bit if you have a guy, for example, some of these were really good, some centers that, would immediately get a hand up in his chest. And they'll ask him to do things like this, kind of launch upfield into that outside shoulder here in that one technique, but it turns into like an inside zone. So the center steps in front. He had his hand ready, so he gets his hands inside. You can see then he's unable to get back inside with his hands. Then all of a sudden the down block comes along and pushes him off. Also, he was a tad late for the positioning. Also, I think he needs more consistent shed speed, which again comes back to the very beginning, getting into contact early to improve the shed speed, but then also for closing results. When he tackles, very little leakage is given up. I mean, if he gets his hands on you, you're down there, you're not getting extra yards, you're probably going down. Now, where that can kind of come off a little bit is like when they get into a bunch and he kind of just jumps onto the pile. Maybe not necessarily there. Usually when he's back on his heels, run gets to the second level, he's pushed back off the line, he can get moved back by a running back going downhill. He does miss tackles because, again, I don't think he has elite range or closing speed in open space or some of that twitch to change the direction. But what you do like, and it shows him more as a pass rusher, is body control. He's not a guy that's, consistently running past everybody falling on the ground. That doesn't happen a ton. It does happen occasionally, more in open field against the runner, but in the backfield, he's not running all over the place out of control. That's a big part. He plays under control, plays within himself. I like that. And that transitioned perfectly into pass rush. Less things to touch on here, but let's go for it. First off, he wins with length to me for quick sheds. He's a guy that's capable of winning quickly. Now, this reminds me a ton of Isaiah Buggs, the way that he went quickly, push, pull, swim move, like he could win very quickly in the rep. This is a guy that wins, I think, in a very similar way. You don't get consistent walk back. You don't get consistent bull rush. It's not who he is. And I think, Benito Jones, for example, can get bull rush. That guy can get leverage, run you back to the quarterback. And he's much more explosive. This guy isn't necessarily that. I think he's less explosive, less extremely powerful, creating consistent leverage, and more so fast hands, more so length. So he wins that way. That's why you get quick wins. He has long arm length, shoulder shoves. You'll see some of the club moves. You'll see the swim moves. That's how he wins. He struggles to get skinny, shooting through gaps, as we touched on, but he does have some upper body contact balance because he's just a big dude. So, obviously that's part of it. He's a wide rusher as well. He's wide. Like, he takes up a lot of space as a pass rusher. Now, again, as I said, he can kind of twist his upper body, but as he gets going downhill, he's much more of a wide pass rusher, and where that makes an issue is he struggles to gain an edge. He struggles to shake a guard. Like, if he's one-on-one with a guard, and it's like, oh, shake him, get an edge, and go by. He's not going to do that, which is probably why he won't play in a lot of pass rush situations. If he can transition from playing the run to the pass, and it means it's 1st and 10, it's like, oh, player block, I got that early positioning, and then it turns into play action, he's going to be effective here because he wins quickly. It's just like Isaiah Buggs. As the play wears on, I have less and less expectations for him to actually get pressure. However, early, I think he can win. He did show some of those later wins in college. I think that may clean up a little bit in the NFL, maybe a little bit less of that. But why the reason that he does that is he continuously works his hands, and he understands break points. He understands the leverage of it. He's crafty, which we'll touch on. His hands are lively. His hands are active working downhill, and he understands break points. This is exactly my next note here. You see it on the Indiana sack. He just keeps working. He keeps working, and it's the pursuit. Big part for me is pass rush lanes. This is something that was a huge focus last year. Lines don't play a spy, right? They're not going to have a guy out there that's just like, you guard the quarterback. When you play guys that can run, you have to be able to fill your rush lanes. You can't have two guys, both kick outside, no one's in the inside, he steps up and takes off. You have to have a guy that plays responsible for the run lanes, specifically in the interior. And you saw some of our players were pretty good at that. And other times it was like, oh, that was kind of rough. But we ask our big guys in the middle, the Bugs, we ask the Liams, like, hey, you have to, and I'll lean a little bit less because he was more so of the pass rusher, but you have to stay in your pass rush lanes. You have to fill in where you need to fill in. You can't have a guy crash in and you just kind of stay there because then he kicks outside and you can't catch up. He's not running anybody down. So you have to fill your pass rush lanes, and that's to me where he's good. But when you talk about winning as a pass rusher, he's crafty. He has a crafty setup for pass rush lanes, for twists, for stunts. Austin P, you see that there. He'll set up strikes. Look here against FAU, the hesitation, and then he shoots forward. He is very crafty, and this is as a run defender as well, but he sets dudes up. He sets it up based on how the stunt or the game's coming around inside, and he kind of like delays it, and then he works outside. He knows how to fill into open lanes. He does not give up pass rush lanes, and then he also knows how to play his guy. Like, if he knows a blitzer's coming next to him in a gap over, he may lean into that. And then as soon as that lineman moves his head, takes his eyes off, okay, I'm going to get inside. Because he's not going to shake you. He just needs to try to get into half the man. That way he can use those hand moves. That way he can break at the elbow, break at the shoulder, swim over top, club move, and then I can just get half of the man, and now all of a sudden I can be a disruptor. I'm not going to be a sack artist because I can't close like that, but I can at least disrupt. And a huge part comes back then, especially in today's league, quick play action, RPOs, getting in pass lanes, getting your hands up. Huge. Obviously, he's very lengthy, fantastic vision, and also when you win quick, you can get in the way of pass lanes. He had 2 pass breakups this past season, and he had like 3 or 4 that could have been this past year as well. So it's definitely something that, may at the biggest time, we may say, oh, come on, we need to stop here. It's 3rd and 3, and all of a sudden, you get this Brodric Martin knocking down a pass at the line of scrimmage, and it's like, yes, that was better than the sack. That's all we needed. So it's the FBI to me as a pass rusher more than anything. Now, occasionally he will run past screens, okay, so I do feel like, he can get a little bit beyond himself there when he kind of feels like, oh, I got a pass rush lane, I'm going, like, this is my chance. So he will run past screens, you can set him up there. He did play the one well against FIU, where he kind of ran it down, made a tackle, but again, maintaining pass rush lanes, dropping into a spiral over the middle, pursuit, effort, and then vision, but also body control. If he does have a clear shot, he's probably not going to run past your quarterback, but he is going to struggle to close. So at very least, spill it. At very least, spill it, and that's what you're hoping for. Or keep it inside, whatever we may be looking for. Body control in space, again, that chase down screen as I just touched on against FIU. He plays under control. It helps in pursuit as of a quarterback as well. Finishing in space is a very clean process, as I touched on. When he gets his hands, it's very clean. It's smooth. There's no leakage, basically. The end tackle stunts, the TE stunts, those things from inside outsides, you did see a guy that was really good. He stayed under control. He used his hands well, and he would be able to delay it. So he'd push forward, and then all of a sudden the end comes in, and he could kind of control himself. He could break at contact, keep actively working his hands. The first one didn't work. Let me find another way through here. Shoulder, elbow, hands, wrist. Let me keep battling through this. But then also staying under control where he can move laterally. And that's the big thing about him, as same thing as his own run defender as well. He's not going to run it down or reposition himself in front of your guard because he just doesn't have those movement skills. But he's also not going to fall over himself. He's going to keep really good balance in that body control. And it shows up there. Like, you would expect that this would be a guy that's going to struggle. Oh, they got in his chest. They got on him. Like, he's going to struggle there. He doesn't. He does not struggle there. And again, he kind of works around well, but he just doesn't have the closing speed, so you don't get a lot of sacks. Also, I think he needs improvement against guys that work to short set him. I think the same thing could pop up against the run as well. Here, when he doesn't get some of that quick get off, he's lined a little bit wider here on the guard, 3 tech in this position. So he's a little bit later off the line. O-lineman also isn't coming forward. He's already set, so he jump sets into his chest. And you can see that the breakaway isn't very clean. There's not much of a counter here. He's kind of all over the place slapping around. But we do like his active hands, high awareness. He does tip this pass even though it's caught. So that is something that you do like about this. But occasionally you'll see he'll jump up and get a little bit higher, and then he'll expose his chest, and I see that usually when he's later off break that point of attack, reset your hands. Resetting is huge. More consistency as a resetter, as a run defender and pass rusher, maybe more so even as a run defender. Resetting hands, resetting base, sitting down, that kind of thing. But even his hands, I saw very little success creating bull rush, converting speed to power. Bull rush attempts basically just die out. They ultimately just sit down, anchor it, because he can't maintain leverage and also the force to walk you back consistently. It doesn't happen. He might get you first couple steps, but if it's a pure bull rush, usually he struggles as they kind of just die out. Now, there are some flash examples of some good, even the one working on the end. He didn't do it a lot, though. So there's some good, and it's not that he's a terrible mover. It's just that he doesn't really create a lot of space. There's not a lot of change of speed. He's kind of moving at the same speed. Doesn't create a ton of leverage that's consistent, and the drive, it kind of just dies out after a couple steps. However, you do get some knockback wins. Not in your pure walkback sense, but you get knockback wins where he just keeps working, punching his hands, gets you off balance, leads you into another guy, plays off of the kind of momentum. He's really good at playing your body weight. You're leaning this way, okay, I'm going to play off of that. I stay under control, so I can move different ways, and that's how he kind of walks back in his own way, in my opinion. So that's what I see for him as a player. My kind of final notes on this is I think he has the length to occupy both A gaps. He's got sufficient range. He just needs to be I think he needs to be more consistent at positioning himself early, but also the shed process. His hit and miss against double teams and down blocks, specifically the recognition, but he does flash that he can do it. He flashed the ability to set himself, sit down, form an anchor. He can do it. He's got the knee bend necessary, and I think he's also got the strength to do it, even though he could probably get a little bit stronger. Like, he can do that, so it's just about being more consistent there. There are balance issues with positioning and inconsistent resetting from miss on first effort, as I touched on earlier. He plays with high energy all the time, but it was like, dude, this guy's like going crazy. And that's probably what flashed, is like just the effort that he was giving. For a guy that had 532 steps, you never question his effort, the fire, just the tenacity, as they say, that he plays with. He also improved every season, concluding having his best pass rushing season this past year. And again, like I said, he played against some good offensive linemen. But one thing, bro, my final note, finally, I think we have a guy that's going to make a special teams impact on field goal attempts. Okay, my thing is, you put a guy with 35-inch arms that's 6'4.5". He plays defensive tackle on the field goal block alignment. I think we're finally going to have a guy that potentially could block a field goal. Like, look, every year we're like, why is nobody jumping? This guy might block a field goal. The energy that he plays with, he might go out and block one. If it's 55 yards, the ball's a little bit lower, I'm going to do this. Brodric Martin blocks a field goal this season. Extra point field goal, something. He gets his hands on something this year. Been missing that. I'm sorry, calm down. We've been missing that, though. From the normal guys that you put out there, you're not putting a receiver at DT. The normal guys that you put out there, I think he actually has a presence to block an extra point or a field goal, and I'm so excited for that. But yeah, I think he's going to pair up with Bugs Jones. He'll be a rotational player. He'll allow those guys to also get fresh. It'll help him keep fresh. I don't think he'll start the season, but I do think when you look at the long-term outlook, you need this piece. You need a guy that can play multiple gaps. It fits into what we're doing. I say look no further than a team like the Bengals, and I think it just makes sense for the fit here. When you look at some of my grades, I'll throw them on the screen quickly here. I thought he had sufficient body control as well. The only reason this isn't higher is really more so because I don't think he always positions himself extremely well or gets himself positioned early enough and things like that. It's not necessarily that he can't control himself, as I touched on, like a lot of things, like how he carries weight a lot of times, but it's more so about positioning. Pass rush, I'm not, look, you're probably like, well, how is that grade not higher, considering that, look, hey, you just hyped him up, because he's not going to be a pass rush piece. Although when he's out there, I think he knows how he can win. So you'll get flash plays, but I don't think he's ever going to be a guy you're like, man, he's a pass rush nightmare. Like, hey, you got to watch this guy. Like, I don't think he'll be that because he doesn't have that skill set. But I do think a guy that he's going to get some quick wins in there for sure, and some effort wins probably as well. I think he's a pretty smart player. I think he's above average slightly in that sense of an FBI player. Probably needs to improve at taking on down blocks, being aware of double teams, things of that nature, like the things that he can improve upon, especially against the run. But I do think there's football intelligence. You see the snap count, you see the recognition, you see when to get aggressive, and then also the hand usage I think is definitely a plus here. Biggest thing is he keeps his hands ready, holstered, and he knows how to keep fighting, keep attacking. But the biggest thing is here is improving his shed, improving not getting latched on by a guy that jump sets him, a guy that gets his hands in his chest early where he misplays it, resetting, shed that, get back position, and go win that battle. But he does flash the ability to reset his hands. So again, like a lot of these other guys, I like his hand usage. With that being said, that is Brodric Martin. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.